So, welcome everybody to the South African TA Association webinar for October, and a special welcome to Suriya joining us from across the Indian Ocean. We're looking forward to your presentation for us tonight. Over to you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, and the South Asian Tea Association, and also special thanks to Karen, who couldn't join today. She just told me she has some other conflict commitment. So thank you for having me here for this webinar, and welcome to all of you who have signed up for this webinar, and I am looking for some learning together. Around timing, I guess the session is going to be roughly around 2 hours, and also as part of the session there will be some exercise, so feel about that once I believe what the exercise is about. And at any point, please raise your hand so that if you have any questions, we could, I'll be most pleased to respond to them. And Alex, how do you manage when people drop or when I drop out because of any connectivity issues?
So if anybody does drop off the call, then just feel free to click on the same Zoom ID link that I've sent you, and it should bring you straight back into the room. And you're also welcome to email me as we go in case you have any technical issues. And that goes as well for you, Suriya. I did notice that there's a little bit of lag in your audio sometimes. So the internet connection, I think, on your side is not the best right now. Let's hold thumbs that it only gets better.
I do hope so. It gets better because, yeah, the signal could be on and off. I don't know. Let's hope for the best. Okay, so I also have a presentation which I would share the screen when we get to that, and I will also be giving you a PDF version of the presentation, which Alex you can share with everybody. And okay, at that time I will share my screen. So before we start, shall we quickly introduce ourselves, because I could see there are many faces. Very brief introduction of who you are and what is your exposure to TA and where you are from and your field of specialization. We'll do one quick round.
I'm happy to kick off. My name is Alex van Oostrian.
So who would like to go first?
I'm a representative of the South African TA Association as the vice chair. I'm a coach and a coach supervisor based in Cape Town in South Africa. Currently, I don't have a TA qualification, but my area of interest is in organizations.
Thank you, Alex.
Hi, this is Eric here from India, based out of Bangalore. I'm pursuing my diploma in TA with Suriya. I'm doing a training with him, and that's one of the reasons why I'm joining the sessions. I'm pretty excited to learn a lot more about TA and apply a lot of that in my work at work. So I also head HR for a startup in Bangalore, and I at least try to implement some of the practices that I learned in TA at my work. Thank you.
My name is Piyush. Sorry, Anna, you want to go first? Okay. So I've been with TA for about 5.5 to 6 years in psychotherapy, and for about 2.5 years with Suriya in TA OD. So I am an executive coach. I also do therapy, and I find both of them have their challenges and interesting stuff. I work out of Bangalore, and I do some corporate training as well. So that's me.
Hi, my name is Anne, and I'm from Canada. I've trained with Van Joins in America for psychotherapy transactional analysis, and I'm starting training with Anna de Graaf in England in organizational TA. So I have a private practice and also do some organizational training and development.
Hello, I'm Frauke Willering, and I'm from the Netherlands. I'm studying with Julie Hay, and I'm almost done getting my MSc in DTA, and had also training with Anna de Graaf on the TA Academy in the Netherlands. Okay.
Thank you.
And I'm a teacher in the higher vocational education, social work.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Christy. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa. I am working as a life coach and also studying with Karen Pratt, working towards my CTA. I did my TA 101 in 2014, so it's been a few years now. But use TA in my coaching all the time, run workshops, teaching the basic models to people. So yeah, excited to be here.
Thank you.
My name is Rama and I live in Coimbatore. I've trained with Suriya and right now pursuing my CTA. I'm a consultant psychologist and also a teacher.
Hi, I'm Kausalya. I'm from Coimbatore, India. I'm a consultant psychologist in a pain clinic, and I do work in India. And I'm trained under Suriya and Saru. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all for introducing yourself. I didn't start with introducing me because I thought you would have gone through my profile. Nevertheless, I was not sure. Remember. Anyway, quickly, I'm a teaching and supervising transactionalist in the organizational field. I'm also professor of organizational behavior in a business school based out of Coimbatore. And I also have some social field engagements. And currently my work is mostly split between teaching in the business school and also advanced TA training in the field of the developmental TA field, primarily focusing on organizations and education. And I also have some CTA contracts with counselling fields, given my experience with counselling for the last 10 to 15 years or so. And the presentation that I'm going to make today is based on my exploration over the last 2 decades with my engagement with transaction analysis. So before I share with you what this Physis-based approach to developmental TA is, I would like to ask this question to each one of you. What is the most exciting and appealing aspect of TA for you? What do you consider as the most interesting part of TA? And take a minute to reflect, and whoever is ready to respond.
So for me, one of the reasons why I love TA is, and I think in one of the training classes I heard this, and it makes so much sense to me. TA is deceptively very simple, but yet very complex. So I could put it in very, very simple situations back at home as well as at work. But what I get, and there are instant returns. But I could use the same model at very, very complex situations, and it is very, very helpful at work. You really don't need to understand a lot of processes to know TA. So that's broadly how I would put it.
Thank you, Eric.
For me, it's like this framework gives a lot of scope to create evidence of the learning or the change that one has undergone within their own self using these concepts. I mean, it's so tangible, like the change and development is very tangible. It's very observable.
For me, it's I love how simple the models are and how they perfectly illustrate for me what's going on between me and everybody else in my life. And I love how they give so much opportunity to change in any given moment. Yeah, I love the presentness of it.
Okay.
Suriya, I think I've understood the question slightly differently. So let me just say how I've understood it. For me, the most exciting part of TA is transgenerational scripts.
Okay.
For me, I find TA to be a really useful language and framework to understand what's happening with clients, and also the capacity to teach clients these simple concepts so that they can have a deeper understanding and deeper compassion for themselves and their struggles.
Okay.
For me, the script is very fascinating, but I wish there was more on the positive aspects of it. There is some in Physis, and I have seen Vanita talk about it, but I wish there was more of that. It's a lot to do with how to heal yourself.
Okay.
And it's fascinating.
Okay, for me, most exciting is the hope it gives, because there are always options, and that's giving hope for growth and development.
Okay.
In short.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. To me, it is TA is very easy and applicable everywhere. Wherever I go, I can apply. And moreover, change and development is for self also it is helpful, and for others also it is yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. It's quite fascinating to philosophy of transactional, and of course the simplicity, the deceptively simplicity of the concepts and the models, and the ease with which it could be applied in ourselves, and the readiness with which it could be applied. The more I get to learn transaction analysis, what appealed to me the most was how integrative it is, in the sense of being open to several other modalities and models which could be embraced and made its own. Like many transactional practitioners, including me, who practice counseling or coaching, or even in organizational fields, we use Gestalt and NLP and psychodrama without even knowing, because we've been using them for so long, they become part of the TA repertoire. So I find it's so integrative in its approach, not only within the various approaches to TA, but also non-TA fields. also drawn the hope, some of you said. And having said that, I also realized it's quite positivist and based on hope and hokiness, and its goal being autonomy. I found in my work much of the theory and the concepts were focusing on the pathology, starting with Burns' notion of contact exclusion, and the whole way script is being understood and interpreted. So when I was working with organizations, I found, at least personally, I struggled a lot in order to apply many of these pathology-based models into an organizational context. And that is where Julie Hay's work in terms of reframing many of these concepts to make them organizational and, for example, using drivers as working styles. So that gave a new perspective of how the concepts and models could be transformed context from the original context in which Byrne developed these concepts. So still I found, especially when we are working with organizations in the developmental field, when I say organizations, I include the field of education as well. And of course, those are working with coaching, work a lot with organizational contexts as well. So I might be using organization and organization development, but please note that it includes all the developmental fields. Definitely not referring to psychotherapy. So when we use transaction analysis in an organizational context and try to adapt these concepts which are developed for psychotherapy in the non-psychotherapy field, I found again some struggle in terms of focusing on the developmental aspect. So somewhere I constantly kept thinking, no, something was missing. And at one point I thought possibly it is because the emphasis on autonomy in terms of practice, so the results that we're expecting from the organizations might be more. Because if you look at the TA journal articles, not much written on autonomy compared to how much is being written on various forms of pathology. So while I was for more working with the transactional analysis in these developmental fields.
Sorry, Suriya, that last bit didn't come
you want
through.
to say something?
Yeah, that last bit didn't come through because of the bad connection. Just the last 30 seconds or so.
Oh, is it? Okay. So I was, all right. So I was basically, are you able to hear me now?
Yes, that's better. It just, it phases in and out of good and bad connection.
Oh, okay. Because, okay, it stays well now. So I was basically talking about how not much has been written about Physis. And I was principally asking, are you all familiar with the concept of Physis? Did you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now, Surya.
Okay. I was principally saying that there's very little that is written about Physis in the TA literature. So are you familiar with the concept of Physis?
Most people have indicated they are, Suriya, yeah.
Okay. So am I not seeing the visuals, Alex? Is that why I'm not seeing any reaction?
I'm not sure what you're seeing, but from what I can see, most people have indicated that they are familiar with Physis as a concept.
Oh, okay, because I'm not seeing many people, the visuals moving, so I was not able to pick it up. Thank you for that.
Sure.
All right. So what I'm going to present today is what I discovered from another perspective of an operational way of working with Physis as the basis when we work on any of these developmental TA fields. To give you a little background, some 8 to 10 years back, I was exposed to this work by Dr. Monica Sharma, who was a UN developmental program director, where she has worked in over 60 countries on health projects of the UN, where she has tested many of her tools, some of which I would be sharing with you today. And when I was exposed to these tools, particularly one aspect of it struck me very powerfully. And immediately I realized it has a strong resonance with something in transaction analysis. And then with my continued engagement with that work, I realized it gives a practical way of tapping into the Physis of each one of us. And that is what I'm going to share with you all today. So what I would do is I would start the presentation right now. I'll quickly take you through the initial part of it, and then we will move on to doing some work together. I'm going to share the presentation. At any point of time, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Are you all able to see the present slide?
Yes, we can see it. Thanks, Suriya.
And the only one you are, yeah.
I can see the slide.
All right. This is the overview of what. All right, in another hour and a half or so. So we'll look at briefly what Physis is, and we'll look at what is the normal approach to problems and the change in organizations, and we'll get into the idea of how could we source our inner power, which Physis is operationally. And then we'll also look at how it is closely connected with our fears, and then look at how this integrative model could pave way for a Physis-based approach to organizational work or any developmental TA work, and which I reframed as the integrated organization development framework. And then we would close with what are the benefits of a Physis-based approach to OD. That should not be physics. I think the autocorrect made it into physics. So we'll start with this quote from Einstein. It said, "The world we have made as a result of the level of thinking we have done thus far creates problems that we cannot solve at the same level at which we have created them." we shall require a substantially new manner of thinking if humankind is to survive. I'm sure many of you must be familiar with this quote, and where it fits in is most of the way we use TA concepts is from a pathology point of view, looking at what is problem and how do I fix it. And as Einstein says, we cannot fix a problem just at the same level at which it was created. So we need to transcend to another level so that we could find a sustainable solution to the problems that we are looking at. So what I found was that one way could be to base our work tapping into the power of Physis. So what is Physis? If you look at some of the original ways or the way defined, basically it's a Greek theological, philosophical and a scientific term in English which is usually translated closely as nature. Whereas one of the oldest definitions of Physis has been change or growth which comes from the spirit within the person. In other words, it is also called the essence of life. Erikman defined Physis as the force of nature which eternally strives to make things grow and to make growing things more perfect. So Physis as a verb means to grow or to be or what things really are. So when you look at all these various perspectives of what Physis could be, I realized, for those who are familiar with the Eastern philosophy of either the Hindu philosophy or this philosophy, the notion of dharma, layers, and the deepest sense of dharma is my true nature, anybody's true nature, and that is what dharma is. So I find Physis resonating a lot at a much deeper level, even at the, not just at the psychological or the social level, but also at the spiritual level. So how could Physis make a difference in our work with organizations or any of the developmental fields? And Eric Burns elaborated that beautifully. And this is where I draw the inspiration from developing a Physis-based approach to transactional analysis. He says Physis is some force which drives people to grow, progress, and do better. We may regard this as a fourth force of personality besides the ego, the superego, and the id. Psychiatrists and psychologists know little or nothing about this fourth part. Religious people might say it was the soul. Scientists have no answer at present. But it helps to suppose that there is a system of tensions which normally pushes living things continually in the direction of progress. We may suppose the existence of such a system in order to explain why people grow and why the human race tries to get better, and why animals gradually become more venturesome through evolution, and why a creative love of beauty is added to the mind as that energy system becomes more complicated from the jellyfish up through the frogs and monkeys to man. We can forget the question of whose benefit this is for and still suppose that there is a force within us which keeps us striving to go onward and upward. So this innate force in all of us which constantly strives for growth and change, I realized could have the key to sustainable change in all the work that we do. And Eric Berne showed defies the aspiration arrow as the arrow that passes through all the ego states and goes beyond ego states. Adrienne Lee actually talks about, when she talks about her spiritual model of transactionalism, is how this Pisces, the aspiration arrow. Developmentally, Julie Hay depicts the ego script metrics along with the aspiration arrow. To me, which is quite a significant thing, which again is not much emphasized on in developmental work. We still focus on what is not working in organizations or in organizational scripts and so on. Hardly we have tools or models to work directly through and with Pisces, the aspiration that is there either in individuals or in groups, organizations and educational systems. So that is where I realize we need to find a way of working through this or tapping into this force and being inspired by this innate force that is there in each one of us. And that is what Petruska Clarkson says in her, I think the one single article in the TA journal which is dedicated totally to Physis is this work. It's a seminal work on Physis. The task of psychotherapists and educators, you can generalize it to all transactional analysts, is to allow people to re-experience this life force within themselves in order to facilitate healing and self-realization. For people to change, they first need to feel well and okay, that is, in touch with their life force. To kindle this is perhaps the most central and important of the therapist's tasks. Without the experience of Physis, there is not the energy, the belief, or the capacity to even use help. Thus, it may be both the first requirement in psychotherapy, you can add and all fields of growth and change, and the last. At some stage we talk about the metanoia moment in therapy that occurs when the client suddenly re-experiences a total shift in paradigm. So when I read this bit in the article by Clarkson, that really struck me and really made me think deeper into what is my role as a transactional analyst, whether I'm working in organizations or executives in the context or in educational setting. We do lots of frameworks and models. Still, there is one bit that probably is missing. Found, in my experience, my opinion, and this is the missing link. What do we do to kindle this? Maybe both in any of this we are doing. It's something, not an easy thing to do. But what I realized the more I worked with organizations and also the more I was exposed to the stewardship work by Monica Sharma is that values could be the operational form of Physis. I would like to pause for a moment here and ask you all to think for a moment. What is it that lies at the basis of your being as a person?
Can you repeat the question once?
What is it, in your opinion, lies at the root of your being as a person? In other words, what do you think moves you and drives you to be or to do whatever you are doing or whatever you are being in life?
Thanks.
So I've sent it in chat, Surya, but I think it is core values and beliefs. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I assume you're wanting us to answer. It's a fairly deep question, but I think what you're getting at is what is our why, I suppose, about why we do what we do. And I think, I don't know, that's a bigger question that I was prepared to answer today, to be honest. But I will say that, you know, as a therapist, I'm driven to help people heal, you know, sort of quite trite, really. It sounds trite, but help people be the best that they can be. And I think, like, that's a work perspective, but I think, you know, our values can also be personal and separate from what we do in work, even though, of course, they overlap. But, yeah, take a stab at it.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. It's not easy to answer. Eric, did you want to say something?
Yeah. So for me, I think the biggest thing is basically, you know, what the previous person said, the why. I think the joy of just discovery, joy of learning something new, and rediscovering myself every time. I think that drives me further. So that's broadly what I think, you know, from a personal angle, which is a core value and a belief that helps me move forward.
Okay. All right. So I guess, you know, as I don't know who answered that. Was it Anna or Anne or because I'm not having a visual here. So as you said, it's not an easy question to answer, and maybe that is why not much has been written on this, or maybe that is why, you know, it has been overlooked a lot by the mainstream practice and literature as well. Because any effort or attempt to define Physis, you know, gets too abstract. So what I realized was we needed a way to make it tangible, because as transactionalists, we want everything to be seen, felt. And I realized the closest that we could get to in touch with our Physis could be by getting in touch with those values that are so close to our heart, or that are at the bottom of our being. And this work that I was doing and still do with in the stewardship field, gives a simple way in which we could get to that. And from that derives a model of how we could transfer this personal power in me into a larger social setting, be it an organization or communities and societies at large. And that is something I'm quite excited to share with you today. And of course, there's a lot of scope for developing this further. And why is this need? To give you a brief foundation of why do we need to make this shift. Whenever there is a problem, there are many ways and many approaches that we take. Say, for example, I'm using a very mundane, simple example. When I cut my finger and it is bleeding, so what is the first thing that we do? We would clean it and apply a band-aid, right? And that is an immediate solution to the problem. And that is what is depicted here as a circle and the red bit says the band-aid. But let us say, even after applying the band-aid, the bleeding doesn't stop. It continues to bleed. So then I get little suspicious about, oh, probably there is some sort of a disorder that is much deeper than just a surface cut. Which makes me think, is there any systemic issue? Say, for example, something to do with something not okay with my blood or the circulatory system. And then maybe we go to a hospital and take care of it, see a doctor. So that is approaching the problem at the next level, at the systems and the structure level. Again, in transactional analysis, we have tools and models to deal with this, be it with individuals or with systems like organizations. But when we realize that actually I have some sort of a very underlying issue with my circulatory system or blood flow or whatever, then I need to look at some solution which is sustainable and long lasting, not just fixing this one-time cut. And what do I do for that? Maybe I change my lifestyle, which includes changing my food habits and changing my life pattern, work hours, balancing work and life. So many elements which forms, in other words, I'm focusing not just on the illness anymore, I'm focusing on my health at large. So that is where we get into where we are talking about transformational leadership. In other words, going beyond an immediate solution to the problem. And often it is, as I said, focusing on health, focusing on diet or things like that when it comes to health matters. But you will realize all these solutions are partial solutions. They are not complete solutions. Because just applying a band-aid is not going to deal with the core issue, or just going to hospital, popping some pills is not going to deal with it forever, or just talking about health is not going to handle. For a lasting, sustainable solution, we need to address all the three levels. And this is a systemic framework that helps us address any issue, be it at the individual level or at the social level, organizational level, and so on, from a systems approach. There are several systems models to work with organizations. The difference in this case is the outer circle, which talks about the embodying values to design and evolve sustainable and equitable change. Most of the systems models that we are familiar with deal with the central two circles, the immediate solutions and the transforming business from say scarcity to abundance. That is focusing on the systems perspective, putting in place systems. To give you an example in an organizational context, recently there was a client who had an issue of high rate of attrition. So the immediate solution that they found was hire more people. Hire more people than the number of people who are leaving, so that we'll always have some buffer in case people leave. So that is part of the central circle. That is the immediate technical solution to it. But we know that is not going to last for long. So in order to make this part of an ongoing system, they had to put in place to their make to some of their compensation policies, because they found main reason people basically comments on. Not going to stop because it help things improve and then things gotten back to us. So that is where they had to focus on the how to look at values.
Suriya, I'm sorry that last bit broke up
All our
due to bad connection. Could you say the last minute or so again?
Yes. Which part are you referring to?
Suriya, about the last minute and
Yes.
a half or so that you've spoken, we didn't hear anything.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Okay. So, do you hear me now? Well,
it's still intermittent. If there is anything that you can do to improve the quality of your connection on your side, maybe you could try that.
I don't know because it says it is fine. I've been trying to change it.
That is better right now.
Okay. I will try to. I don't know what else could be done to fix this, but yeah, I'll do my best. So, no, I was giving the example of. Do you hear me now? Clear?
Yeah, I can hear you clearly now.
Okay. So I was giving you the example of attrition, where in an organization, when people leave, and that was industry norm, one immediate solution that they could come up was hire more than the numbers who are leaving. That was the inner circle about the technical solution, which is a quick fix. But for that to last longer, they need to find why people were leaving. And they found, okay, increase compensation, put in place the hiring, which could be much more to respond to attrition. That was the central circle, which deals with systems shifts. But that was not sufficient because they found in the long run something was fundamentally missing in the workplace, which basically was the organization and the leadership was not aligning their organizational values with what was being practiced down there. So eventually, we had to work with the leadership at various levels to align their values, and then they function and act from their values, which basically means it made a huge difference in the way they were engaging with their workforce, which resulted in improved employee engagement at all the levels, which helped to bring attrition well below the industry norm. So it's basically to give a total solution, a holistic, complete solution to a problem, need to address the solution at all these three levels. Technical solution level, in other words, what do we do? Systems level, putting in place processes, structures, policies, and most importantly, at the values level. Those universal values that each one of us stand for, if we could align everybody and all our actions to that, then the solution would be sustainable. And not only sustainable, but also equitable. So this was the model which is used in bringing large-scale social transformation. Because most of the real-world solutions restrict themselves to the first inner two circles, looking at immediate solutions and putting in place policies. But often ignored is the outer circle, primarily because by now, if you would have guessed, it's really time consuming. It takes a lot of time to align everybody involved, all stakeholders, to the values that underlie our actions.
So Surya, this is Eric here.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. So
yes, I hear you.
Okay. So in typical IT setups, right? So and this is, we're coming up with models which are the old school models have all gone away, like the agile, waterfall. Now they're talking about continuous integration and continuous development and stuff like that, which is being as agile as possible on a day-to-day basis, right?
Yes.
So then what I also see, and this, pardon me for saying this, but there is a lot of affinity against organization development work. People don't want to work with organization development, and that may be some of the reasons why you will not see a lot of articles around the last circle, because it is the hardest to work with. It's like talking about the elephant in the room, which is and that's how a lot of people continue to have roles in the organization. So this is hard, I'm sure, in many other industries as well, but in IT it becomes a lot more difficult to talk about values in organizations.
Absolutely. So the thing is, Eric, what often we do is, just because it is difficult, it is ignored. So when you look at it from transactional point of view, that bit is totally discounted. And so the question therefore is, what are my priorities? What am I willing to compromise? And that is where the whole, the need for emphasizing values becomes all the more important in these times. Because on the one hand, we want sustainable change. On the other hand, we are quite impatient to wait for the results and the impact. So that is the trade-off that each one of us will again need to do from our value stand, from our value point. So yeah, it's never easy and it's never quick.
Sure, thanks, Surya.
Okay, so therefore, eventually the question is, again, in the line with what Eric just now asked, often whenever we face these problems at work or in our own life, we look for answers outside. So that's where this emphasis on values, which is bringing back the whole issue within. That is, the future is not some place we are going to, but one we are creating. The paths to it are not found, but made. And the activity of making them changes both the maker and the destination, said Peter Elliott. So it's another, it's another way of saying, the basic philosophy in TA, that eventually it is my choice. So am I going to make that choice from a space of convenience, or am I going to make this choice from the space of the deep-seated values? Okay, so I'd like to quickly move to an exercise which I invite you all to do to get in touch with those values. Before going into that, any other questions you have in the model that was presented now? Or anything with respect to whatever said so far? Okay, I guess there are no questions. So let us move into this exercise. So this exercise is basically to source the inner power. So here when I say sourcing inner power, I mean getting and identifying that basic fundamental universal value that is very close to me, that is the bottom, of my being. So I invite you to think of a person you respect the most, or whom you admire the most, but whom you have never met. You don't have to say who the person is, but I would like you to think of one such person and make a note. The emphasis is that, someone whom you have never met, because often when we write of some people whom we know personally, we tend to more focus on what they did and how you felt about them and so on. So that's why think of someone. It could be a leader, it could be a star, whoever. Someone whom you admire the most, whom you respect the most. Have you thought of? Okay, I see some heads nodding. So Alex, can you just give me, because I'm not having a visual cue of everybody, if you are seeing everyone.
I was busy writing my name down, the person's name down for myself.
Oh, okay.
Has everyone done it? Yeah, it looks like it, Suriya.
Okay, so have you noted down?
Yes, we're all done.
Okay, all right. Now, I find the quality or the inner value you admire the most in that person. Please do not write what the person did or the person's activities or their personal traits. Think of what is the fundamental inner value or the core quality in that person that you admire. The being of the person. What about the being of the person you admire the most? Take 2 minutes and note it down. It could be more than one, but I invite you to get to the core of it. Not a personality trait or any behavior, function, activity. No. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing the screen now so that you could see everybody. And I would invite you to share what is that quality. You don't need to know who the person is, but what is the quality that you admire?
Courage and loyalty.
Courage.
Being humanly and connected, attached.
Can you repeat that, Frau?
I said.
I heard connected. What did you say before that?
Yeah, connected, attached, being attached and humanly.
Okay. Human.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Humanness. Okay. Thank you.
For me, it's authenticity and also her vulnerability.
Authenticity, vulnerability. Okay.
For me, it's tenacity and I guess belief.
Pardon?
Like, belief in themselves and belief in the mission, kind of. So tenacity was the first word, and
Okay. Yes, I got
believing in the mission. Yeah.
Okay, belief in mission. All right.
For me, it's vulnerability and joy.
Joy and vulnerability. Okay.
For me, it's being persistent and being courage.
Persistent and kind.
Courage.
Okay.
For me, it is the.
Courage.
No, I said comprehensiveness or complete wholeness.
Wholeness. Okay.
For me, it's being grounded and respect for the environment, the world, and its people.
Okay, so being grounded and respect. Okay. Did I hear from everyone? Yes. So thank you all for sharing this. So if you look at this, I would like to read for the benefit of everybody. Courage, loyalty, connectedness, humaneness, authenticity, vulnerability, tenacity, belief in the mission, joy, wholeness, groundedness, and respect. So when you hear this, you will find some of these are universal values, which are terminal values, like for example, courage, humaneness, joy, kindness, wholeness, groundedness, respect. These are universal values, or you call them as core values or terminal values. Whereas some of the other values are basically, they are called instrumental values. The values that are manifest in as personality traits. So I would invite you to take a few moments to reflect on that. For example, you said authenticity or vulnerability. I think I heard two of you say vulnerability. So what is the end state when someone is vulnerable? What does it result in? What we are looking is what is at the core of my being. So when you are vulnerable, what are you left with? And how does it impact people around you?
Well, I think vulnerability allows to feel connected to others, to be attached.
Okay.
For me, when I meant vulnerability, I was looking at being authentic.
Okay, being authentic. So when you say vulnerable, it's being authentic. It's similar to intimacy in TA. Okay, all right. Thank you.
I think for me, the vulnerability, there's something about being very open.
Open.
Yeah, and I guess that takes a lot of courage, but it's showing the world what's going on and being okay with that. which possibly also encourages other people to do the same. Yeah, makes it feel safer.
So when you're vulnerable, you are being open. Beautiful. Similarly, we talked about tenacity. So when you're tenacious, what are you left with? What is underlying tenacity? Because tenacity is again an instrumental value. So what is the core value? What does tenacity lead to?
When I think about somebody who's tenacious, I think about somebody who has absolute faith that it'll work out in some way. Because you're not going to keep going and keep going and keep going unless you really have faith in an outcome. So I guess for me, tenacity comes down to faith.
Faith, okay. So that is something much more deeper.
I think
isn't it?
Consistency of the strength that builds the trust.
Trust. Did you say trust, Rama?
Yeah. The consistency of showing the strength will result in trust. Yeah.
Okay, will result in trust. Yeah, trust is something much more fundamental and basic. So when you look at all these values that you listed and which you admire in the other, do you also realize that that is something much, much deeper in you as well?
Yes. I was just reflecting on some of the values that I noted down. And I realized that some of them are my core values too.
Yeah, that are your values as well.
For example, yes. Joy and intimacy.
Yes. Okay. So was that the experience of others as well? Did you notice that these are the values which are much deeper in you as well?
I see it more as something I long for. Not what I've got already, but what I long for. That's why I admire that person so much.
Okay, that's an interesting take. Because often, when you look at values, especially these universal values, they are universal because it is present in all of us. The question is, am I in touch with it or not? Even if I am not aware of it, the very fact that I see that in the other person is evident that it is there in me at some degrees, at some level, at some measure. Maybe not as much as you would want it to be, but it is. Ask yourself, whatever I do, why do I do what I do? And say, today I'm a coach or a consultant or a teacher, and tomorrow I'm stripped of all these professional identities and I'm sent to some corner to do something else. What would I still be carrying with me?
Yeah.
So that is what we are looking at here. Those core values, which is so inherent and innate in me, that whatever I do, or wherever I am, or whichever identity I take, it is at the core of my being, which is what Physis is about. And of course, there is much more than that to Physis. But I find when I could get in touch and source into that inner wisdom that is already present in me, then that drives me towards growth and change. And that is the basis on which this whole approach to developmental TA that I'm proposing actually. So how do I integrate this? Yes.
So one
Yes,
question.
Piyush.
So then my Physis may not be the same as Eric's Physis or your Physis. Are they all different? Because we come up with different, at least more different ways to look at this universal value. Maybe they end up with the same.
See, the very fact that these values are universal means they are all from the same substratum, or maybe they are made of the same fundamental particle, but they resonate differently under different labels to each one of us. And that is the beauty. I don't remember who said that, but I think it's Christy who said, when I come from that space of openness, then I invite others also into that space. And that is the beauty of these universal values. Then whatever I do takes a totally different flavor and a totally different impact. Because when each member in a group or in an organization or in any collective, in a community, acts from this inner space, that is the core value, then we are all connected at the being level. So specific labels with which we identify it may vary. For some it could be courage, for some others it could be respect, for somebody else it could be joy. But all these come from this basic universal space. If you were to use the TA language, they all come from that okay space. So in other words, when I'm tapped into my value, that becomes an entry point into okayness. And that is the paradigm shift in approaching any of our work, not the other way around. So when my solutions are based on those core values, then they take a totally different look or flavor or taste, whatever we could identify with, and not necessarily the other way around. Because the current paradigm that most of us operate from is we start with the solution and then we fit it into the system. What this model approach invites us to look at it from the other point of view. First, I delve into myself, identify what is there at the core of my being, and then look at my context and then decide what would be the right system shift and what is the technical solution that will be needed in order to change whatever I'm up to change. Does that make sense?
So Surya, from a conceptual perspective, it does make sense. From a personal perspective, it does make sense. But from an organization point of view, and this is what Piyush also mentioned, when you have a larger group of individuals, let's say people who are for the change or people who want to make the change, how do you drive to a common point where there are some common sets of there needs to be driven to some level of commonality, correct? So some level of existential values which will help sustain the change, because as we are talking about is a systemic change. It's not dependent on a particular person.
Yes. So there are two ways in which that needs to be approached, two levels in which it needs to be approached, Eric. One is organizations identifying and then declaring what the organization's values are. And the second level, helping all the stakeholders identify their values, and then by the very nature of these values are from the same substratum, it doesn't matter what name they call it. But if I could align them with the organization's values, or help the individual members see the link between their value and the organization values. And that is how we really enroll people for any of these changes. And then again, in an organizational context or any social context, there is research that says we don't have to get 100% buy-in for any change to be sustainable. They say anywhere from 10 to 15% buy-in is good enough for change to be sustainable. Then it would become sort of a self-sustaining process within the organization.
I would imagine it's also important for the organization to, if they're wanting to create the change at that level, to align themselves with staff who have the same values, because if they don't, then wouldn't it be better for both parties if they moved on to somewhere else? Which might be a bit cutthroat, but I have an example. I used to work for a tour operator, and the management decided that they needed to identify what the company's core values were. And they asked a whole bunch of different staff at all different levels, and they collated everything, and they came up with, these are our 8 core values. And every decision they made from that point onwards had to be in line with the core values. And there was quite a turnaround of staff because some people didn't align with it. But they're doing so much better for it because now they have people who really do buy in. And I mean, the company's doing really well. So maybe that's okay.
Yes, naturally, there are two things I see for this. One is, as you rightly said, whenever such major change takes place, there would be some turnover. And as you said, there is sort of a blessing in disguise, in the sense the people who are left behind are naturally aligned with the organization value. The other thing is, possibly there was an opportunity lost in the way they defined the values. If they could have helped the individuals who left identify how their values could be aligned with the organizations, then things could have been better. Because sometimes what I've noticed is individuals and most of us mistake our instrumental values to be the core values. At the instrumental values level, we may be very different, whereas our core values may still be aligned. So if, as managers, we could help people see that difference. In other words, we talk about larger picture. If we could help them see the bigger picture, then possibly, some of them could have been stopped from going. I don't know about this particular client, but that is another impact of these processes. Yeah. Okay. All right. If there are more questions, shall we move ahead? Often we find, again, the question is, why are we not doing it? If it is as simple as this, why are we not doing it? I'm going to share this screen to take us further. Basically, it is our fears that hold us back. You look at it from the TA perspective, we can say, it is our contaminations or whatever, or script that is holding us back. But it's as simple as this. It is our fears. It is the child fear that holds us back, either as individuals or as organizations, as systems. We have these ingrained fears. In other words, our default positions that hold us back. And it's very normal for all of us to have fears, and we all have fears, don't we? Strong persons know their fears and can transcend them. And of course, when you talk of fears, we're not referring to these real life fears of assault or molestation and so on. We are talking about psychological fears that all of us have. It could be fear of losing something, or fear of making a mistake, fear of rejection, whatever. So think for a moment, what is the fear that holds you back often, especially when you know this is right to do it, but still, something holds you back. What is that fear? Take a minute, think about it, and note it down. And if you are ready and you're willing to, you don't need to, but if you're willing to share, quickly let us go one round and share what your fear is. For example, to start with, my biggest fear is of being seen as wrong. That's a little strange. I have no problem being wrong, but being seen as wrong is quite, scary.
The fear that I listed down was the fear of not being accepted. So I was just reflecting whether it was the fear of rejection, but it's actually not the fear of rejection. It is actually the fear of not being accepted, which is more scarier than being rejected.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Mine is also rejection. And not being accepted. That's linked to it.
Okay, thank you.
I had unacceptable, so that's connected. And my original thought was fear of failure or of success. I can never decide.
Oh yeah. Thank you.
And the fear of judgment.
Oh yeah, being judged. It's big time. Thank you.
Fear of not being trusted.
Okay. Thank you.
Fear of harming others.
Oh, okay. Fear of harming, okay. By harming, do you mean displeasing or?
Yeah, displeasing, not, I shouldn't say harming. Not
Okay.
physical harm, psychological or emotional harm. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
For me, it's similar to yours and to Eric's, fear of being seen to be wrong and the fear of not being accepted.
Oh, thank you.
To me, it is again fear of not being accepted and fear of being wrong.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Of course, this one have more fears. The idea is to somewhere stops our Physis to express itself. So it's interestingly, the burn drew the Physis arrow stemming from the child, and often these child fear which throttles and maybe acts as a bottleneck for the Physis to, of course, metaphorically, when you look at it as an arrow which is stemming out from the child circle, that stops us from expressing ourselves, and often that leads to self-doubt. Even at moments when we know what is the right thing to do, but still we don't take that step in order to do that. So when we are looking at a Physis-based approach to OD, this is the most important thing, because our fears are our default, especially under stress, they come up. So it becomes important for us, therefore, to know what my values are so that we could remind ourselves and ask ourselves, what would I do when I'm grounded in this value? For example, if courage is my value, whenever you experience the fear, ask me yourself, what would I do now if I am grounded and acting from courage? And often I've found that gives immense strength, if you could call it the ego strength, to the adult ego state, to move ahead and not just commit in terms of intention, but also commit in terms of action, to move ahead and act and do things which I wanted to do. So the first values that we stand for are similar to two sides of the same coin. They coexist all the time. So the idea is, which one am I exercising the most? My values that I stand for, or my fears? So that's a nice state which I helped me a lot in working through this conflict. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of fear, and that is what Physis-based work does. It drives us towards growth and change in spite of the fear that we would experience. So basically, it needs to be noticed, named, that saying that, yeah, I have this fear of being not accepted, or fear of being a failure, or fear of being judged, whatever it is, name it, and letting go by being in action. In other words, acting from my value base. So when you look at this and put all these together, the three-pronged framework, and identifying my core value and my fear, this is a broad framework for integrated organizational development. We can use it for any developmental work. Starting with being the change, designing the change, lead and practice. Give you a start with this process. So I would like you to time about 15 minutes to work through these questions. I would want you to think of a real client issue, or even your own personal, in your personal front, or around your community, society, whatever, real issue that you're working with, that you are looking for a lasting, sustainable solution. And I would invite you to think of these questions, which covers, as you could see, all the three domains: the solution, the system shifts, and the values that you stand for. And so the questions are, as you could see in the top rectangle, what universal values do I stand for and embody to make this happen? So whatever the issue that you are working on hand. And what are the universal values and principles that underpin this particular project that you have undertaken? It could be a personal project, or it could be a work-related professional project. Then ask yourself, what systems and cultural norms must be changed to create sustainable and equitable outcomes? For example, in organizations, it could be policies that need to be changed, or organization structures that need to be changed. So what are the systems and cultural norms that need to be changed? And then comes the visible and measurable outcomes. In terms of how does the problem show up? To make this respond to all, having a total solution, partial solution.
Suriya, we're struggling to hear you, especially with the last question about visible and measurable outputs.
Couldn't hear me.
We struggled to hear you for most of the current slide, but especially the last question about visible, or the last couple of questions about visible and measurable outputs.
Oh, okay. All right, all right. So basically, I invite you to think of an issue which is real, which could be either personal or at your work related, and ask yourself these questions with respect to that issue and note down your responses to that. Starting from the top, you can start anywhere actually, because any system has multiple entry points. So you can start from anywhere, either the visible and measurable outputs, or the values, or the systems, whichever circle you can start with. But ask these questions with respect to that issue and note down your responses. So how would you like to do this? Because I think you would need about at least about 15 minutes to work this out. If you would like to work all by yourself.
We've got about 20 minutes left before the end of the webinar. Is it possible to do this in a shorter amount of time? Otherwise,
yes,
we'll finish up at the ending time.
Yes. Oh, okay. 20 minutes. Okay. So shall we do it, say about in 10 minutes, and then we come back?
And are you saying that you want us to go into groups or do this individually, Suriya?
I think we can do it individually right now.
Okay.
Reflections, questions, insights, comments on this?
For me, there was a strong correlation between the blue and the red or orange blocks.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the actions and the embodiment of the universal values.
Okay.
So, so the way I looked at it, so I actually went, inside out. So that was the approach that I took, because it was easy for me to have visible, measurable outputs. But what also happened was that because we did the exercises of universal values earlier, it helped me get in touch with those values, and then I could pick one of them which will help embody certain things. Some principles of the project was a little more easier, and that's the reason systems and cultural norms for me became a lot more easier to implement. So that's how I went about doing it. Yeah, but I guess this model is pretty much, it's less touchy. It is less fluffy. It is more touchy feely from that perspective, and it gives me a way to work towards things.
Okay. Okay.
I had the same experience as Eric in terms of inside out. I also found that I went back and forth a bit once I started putting it on paper, going from inside to out and then changing the one in the middle until it becomes all through something. So one piece by itself may not, it tells me that one piece by itself may solve something, but it won't really sustain.
Yes, absolutely. And it's also important that you realize it is an iterative process. It's not fixed. We can go back and keep working on it till the task is over. Yeah.
Yes.
Any thoughts, comments from others?
I also jumped around a bit when doing it. I started with my problem and then went up to values and then, yeah, everywhere. In my particular situation, it was realizing the lack of systems. So never mind changing them, but it was more creating them. And it was interesting because one of the values was integrity. And only when I really looked at that did I realize how important the structure is, because that gives integrity to what I'm doing, if that makes sense. So it was it was helpful to have the values written there, because they almost gave me permission to think of systems to put into place, which ordinarily I might rebel against.
Okay.
Is that, yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but it was helpful.
Interesting observation. Thank you. So there are a couple of points which you have noticed. One, you can enter through any of these parts, and the other, it's iterative. You can move back and forth. There's no steps in this process. And third, the project or the solution is not complete unless not only we fill all the three boxes, but also we see there is an alignment between the three. And another thing you find is it helps you to identify what is missing that needs to be put in place. As you rightly said at the end, Christy. So that I find is a very powerful strength of this model. And as Eric said, it is in a language which is quite simple, and it could be used by anyone and everyone. In fact, Monica Sharma has worked with this in populations and societies and organizations. Even I myself actually work with a place called Auroville here, with their own local community and their employees. Many of them are not even literate. They don't know to read and write. But when they all take up projects based on this framework, so some others help them note it down, but once they get the idea of what these three circles mean and what these questions are, just come up with fascinating projects that they could use. So any other comments before we close?
So one thing that struck me, I don't know if the model has that in it, but the innermost seems to be the what, the middle one is the how, and the outer one is the why. That's the way.
Yeah, there are many ways people adopt it. Like one of my colleagues, he said, he calls it the 3H model, head, heart, hand model. The center one is the hand.
Okay.
This middle one is the head, and the outer one is the heart. So yeah, as you said, whichever way we look at it, the most salient aspect is it is a holistic model that helps us to create sustainable change. So before I close and call for closing remarks, I just want to conclude with what is the advantage of this model. It is a work in progress. So what are the benefits of Physis based on based approach to organization development using this model. So from my experience, the most significant aspect is this is a significant contribution which I find missing in some of or most of many of the TA models. It imparts design thinking into OD projects. Often we look into OD or any other developmental projects more from a problem solving point of view, whereas this model invites us to think from a design perspective. And it inspires commitment to action for transformational results, not mundane, normal results. And individual, group, and organizational values are aligned when we work using these models. And it fosters stewardship at all levels. And it also gives total solution to issues instead of partial solutions, which I've repeated several times. And when you look at it from the goal of TA perspective, the focus here is on autonomy and homonomy, and not too much on games. We're not concerned about what is not working and stuff like that. We are more concerned about what is missing, and therefore let us put it there. And there is a lot of focus on what is working well. So therefore I find this model invites all stakeholders into their strength, in other words, into their core values, which is their inner source of wisdom, and therefore it could be a powerful tool for us transactionalists to work based on Physis and not necessarily based on pathology. And yeah, before we close, if you want to read some references, of course, the basic work, I'll come to this quote later, was on Physis was from Clarkson's 92 article, and the recent book by Monica Sharma, that is The Radical Transformational Leadership, where many of practitioners, coaches of this methodology, including me, have contributed a little bit from our own experiences of how these tools work. So this is an inspiration that I find quite helpful when working with complex projects from Chief Seattle. When you know who you are, when your mission is clear, and you burn with the inner fire of unbreakable will, no cold can touch your heart, and no deluge can dampen your purpose. I find this quote inspires me and invites me into my Physis, or the universal value. So thank you. And welcome for any closing remarks, what these 2 hours has meant for you.
Thanks, Surya. It was insightful and a lot of reflection and validation.
I guess this webinar was timely for me because I was grappling with a couple of issues that I had to handle. So, I have this, even though it's almost the middle of the night, still have enough energies to take me forward to the next day. So thank you so much, Surya, for that.
Thank you.
I found this also very timely. I did another webinar training this morning that perfectly aligns with exactly what you've been discussing, Surya. Except with that, it was more from the spiritual perspective, and this feels like it's more practical, although also for me spiritual but philosophical, I don't know. But for me it brings a very practical edge to it, which is a very nice balance for a good day of learning. So thank you very much, Surya.
Thank you.
Surya, could you stop the screen share?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, I take from this webinar value and fear, that part, and that connected with Physis well, that's something I still will think about how I will make that concrete. But nice, nice issues to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. And feel free to write to me if you have any further thoughts on this. You're most welcome.
What I'm reflecting on is in moving ahead and acting and letting go the fear, how will I protect myself? It's like the Achilles heel. It is very important to be aware and protect it and then act. So, I'm not still found a way right now. So I'm just reflecting on that. Yeah, I've recognized so how to take care of that part, protect, and then do something from my strength. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, to me it is very thought provocative, and I have attended the same session earlier, and though it is repetitive and it gives much more meaning than the previous one. Especially these universal values, whenever it's really too many values are coming up in front, and I have many questions. I think I'll mail you. So integrating and expanding these universal values, how do I do it? So yeah.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you all.
Suriya, thank you so much. What I particularly enjoyed was the inclusion of values, personal values and universal values in the role of organizational development, as opposed to expansion and profits. It's nice to see some humanity coming back into it, and there's one thing I appreciate about the community of practice that comes together every time we do a webinar as well. Is people are working towards connection and improvement of people's experiences. And thanks for helping us to do that today. It's been a wonderful webinar, and thank you for your time and your energy, and lovely to see new faces and familiar faces alike. Keep an eye out on our newsletter for upcoming webinars for the coming months and next year. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Well.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.